I felt the stem snap between my fingers before I even realized I was gripping it too hard. "Don't look at them," someone whispered behind me. The room glowed gold from the chandeliers above, but something cold ran through the center of my spine. I should have trembled or cried or begged for clarity. Instead, I lifted my chin, just a little, and forced myself to breathe, though everything in me wanted to collapse. Somewhere between the music and the clinking glasses, a woman no one else seemed to notice pressed a folded envelope into my hand and begged me to run, and I didn't know whether to believe her or to believe the man I'd just promised my life to. Sometimes the heart senses danger long before the mind understands it. And you, where are you listening from right now? Write your city in the comments. It is beautiful to see where a story like this finds its first steps. I still remember the scent of rosemary on my wrists, the one I use every morning when I open the shop. It follows me everywhere, even here, even now, inside a place too polished for someone que nasceu entre caixas de entrega e balcões manchados de terra. I don't say where isso fica. Basta imaginar vitrines antigas, portas que rangem e vento que sempre carrega cheiro de asfalto quente. Growing up there taught me to trust the tiny movements. A gaze that lingers too long, a smile that stretches just a bit too wide. Even a sim, I ignored the small warnings life had been handing me for weeks. He had walked in smelling of cedar and success, and I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, timing had finally chosen to be kind to me. He spoke gently, carried himself as if nothing in the world could shake him, and I'd mistaken that stillness for safety. A woman of my idad sabe que calm waters can hide deep currents. But sometimes we want to be wrong. Sometimes we want to rest our bones on the first soft surface we find. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration of beginnings. I wore the dress I'd saved for years, the one that makes me feel like I'm holding myself together even when I'm not. He ordered wine like he knew exactly what I'd enjoy, and I didn't correct him when he chose wrong. I let the sweetness sit on my tongue, because peace, even falsa, tastes good depois de tanta guerra silenciosa. But when his phone rang and he stepped away, something in the air shifted. A shadow crossed the doorway. 2 men entered, scanning the room like they were searching for a specific shape. Mine. Antes que eu entendesse o que meu corpo já sabia, a senhora apareceu ao meu lado, nervosa, mãos tremendo, olhos suplicantes. She spoke rápido demais, her words falling like shards. Danger, lies, run. The envelope she slipped into my palm had weight, and not so physico. Weight of truth, weight of desperation. And here I am, heart sinking, pulse steadying out of sheer disciplina, because I learned long ago that when the world starts to shake beneath you, the last thing you do est deixar transparacer. Elegance is sometimes the only armor a woman has. Dignity, the only weapon. I look at the door where he disappeared. I look at the men watching me like they're waiting for a cue. And I look at the trembling woman who might be wrong, or might be the only person willing to save me tonight. A pergunta que fica, e que eu não consigo calar, is this. If I stand up now, if I walk toward safety, will I be walking away from a lie, or from the last thing I thought could be real? The woman's warning kept echoing in my ears as I pushed myself up from the table, pretending I just needed a moment to breathe. My legs trembled beneath my dress, but I moved devagar, as if nothing inside me were unraveling. From the corner of my eye, I saw the 2 men shift, not enough to alarm anyone, just enough to tell me they were waiting for a signal. I didn't give them one. The hallway leading to the restroom was narrow, lined with framed sketches of city skylines. I kept my pace calm, mão levemente na barriga, como se estivesse apenas ajeitando o tecido do vestido. My heart was pounding, though, loud enough that I wondered if the walls could hear it. When I opened the restroom door, I exhaled pela primeira vez desde que a senhora apareceu. The quiet inside felt like a sanctuary, even with the hum of the vent above me. I turned the lock, but the click sounded fracco demise, inutile demise. Still, it was all I had. I splashed a little water on my wrists, trying to think clearly. Run? Believe a stranger? Doubt the man whose hands had held my face that morning with such tenderness? The questions were choking me, until something cut through the noise. A shift in the air. A presence. A shadow under the door. Then came the voice I recognized too well. "Sweetheart, you okay in there?" He sounded worried, gentle, but there was a stiffness beneath the softness, a pressure disguised as care. I froze, listening. Another voice joined his. One I didn't know. Deeper, firm. "O tipo de voz que não pede," ordena. "Door stays closed until I say." A cold wave rolled through my ribs. The lock clicked again, mas dessa vez, do lado de fora. I tried the handle. It didn't move. My breath falou. For a long moment, I just stood there, hands gripping the sink, staring at my own reflection. I looked composed. Too composed. A face that could pass por qualquer mulher que insiste em não ver o que está bem diante dela. But something stubborn rose in me. Não era coragem. Era lucidez. E acima de tudo, dignidade. Aquela que pulsa mesmo quando o mundo tenta esmagar. I scanned the room. Window? There was one. But bars. Heavy ones. Solid. Whoever planned this knew exactly what they were doing. Then my eyes landed on the small red box on the wall. O alarme de incêndio. I stepped closer. My fingers brushed the metal and hesitated. Pulling it would turn the whole place into chaos, and chaos, às vezes, é o único abrigo disponível, but it would also make them angry. Very angry. "Open the door," the deeper voice commanded again. I closed my eyes. My life had been quiet for so long, predictable, steady, built on rotina's simples. I arranged flowers, I brewed tea, I walked home under the soft glow of street lamps. That quiet life was gone, and if I didn't act agora, I wouldn't have another chance to reclaim it. I reached into my clutch and felt the cool edge of the metal buckle. Heavy enough, sharp enough. My hand shook only once. One strike. The glass shattered. A piercing scream of sound filled the restroom, drowning out every fear in my chest. Chaos bloomed exactly like I needed it to. I didn't wait to think. I ran. When I pulled the door open, the hallway was already flooding with people confused, frightened, rushing in every direction. Smoke drifted out of the kitchen in thin, curling strands, turning everything into a fever dream. I moved with the tide, letting bodies shield me. Someone grabbed my arm. Strong, intentional, but I twisted away with a steadiness I didn't know I had. The two men were pushing against the crowd trying to reach me, but the current was stronger than them. For the first time that night, luck tilted toward my side. I slipped out through a side exit, letting the cool night air hit my face like a blessing. And as I ran down the alley, heels in hand, heart in my throat, one truth settled heavy and certain inside me. If that woman hadn't warned me, I would have never seen the danger until it swallowed me whole. And whatever I was running from now wasn't done chasing me. Night air clung to my skin as I stumbled onto the sidewalk, lungs burning, mind racing. For a moment I just stood there, barefoot, clutching my heels, heartbeat drowning out the city noise. People hurried past me, some glancing, most ignoring. That's the thing sobre cidades grandes. A dor de alguém raramente para o trânsito. I waved down the first cab I saw. The driver looked me up and down. Messy hair, dress twisted, fear estampado no rosto. But he didn't ask questions. Maybe he'd seen worse. Maybe he just didn't care. Either way, when the door shut behind me, I felt a thin slice of safety. "The old shop," I said softly. "Please." The ride was quiet, except for the sound of my breath gradually slowing. I pressed my forehead against the cool window, watching buildings blur into one long ribbon of neon. My thoughts tried to scatter, but one memory gripped tight. The stranger's trembling hands pushing that envelope toward me, and the terror in her eyes. That kind of fear doesn't come from rumor. It comes from history. When the cab pulled up to the storefront that had once been my sanctuary, I hesitated before stepping out. The windows were dark, the sign above the door faintly lit by a leftover street lamp. I'd watered countless dawns here, reorganized dreams and disappointments alike, trying to build something steady. And yet tonight, This place felt like the only corner of the world that might still recognize me. Inside, I turned on just one small lamp. The warm glow spread across the counter, touching the petals of a bouquet I'd arranged earlier that week. Flowers are strange. Mesmo quando secam, guardam tipo de dignidade silenciosa. I wished I felt as intact. I reached for my phone and opened my banking app, praying silently. Maybe things weren't as bad as they seemed. Maybe the woman had mistaken him. Maybe the men were security for someone else. Maybe a red banner filled the screen. Account. Temporarily frozen, initiated by spouse. My throat tightened. A buzzing started inside my skull. I tried the savings account. Frozen. The emergency fund. Frozen. Everything. It felt like someone had pulled a rug que eu nem sabia que estava pisando. I sank onto the small stool behind the counter, elbows on my knees, phone limp in my hands. I tried breathing slowly, the way I do when arranging delicate stems. But with every breath, a new realization hit. He'd planned this. He'd planned me. I don't know how long I stayed there. Minutes. Maybe hours. The shop was silent except for the hum of the old refrigerator in the back. When I finally stood, the strength in my legs felt borrowed. I needed to go home, the home that had always been mine, before romance and promises blurred the world, a place that had held my laughter, my grief, my first attempts at living alone. If anywhere would make sense tonight, it would be there. The walk was long, but I didn't trust another cab. Streetlights cast long, quiet shadows. Every passing car made my shoulders tense. Still, step by step, I made my way through familiar blocks until my building came into view. The entrance looked the same. The hallway smelled of old paint and someone cooking rice down the hall. For a second, hope rose in me, that tiny, stubborn kind that refuses to die even depois de tudo. But when I slid the key into the lock, it stopped halfway. I frowned, tried again. Nothing. I jiggled it, pressed harder, turned the knob. Still, nothing. A door opened behind me. My childhood neighbor stepped out, still wearing her robe, still holding her nightly tea. She squinted at me like she was searching for the right expression. "I thought you were gone," she murmured. "Gone." My voice cracked. "Gone where?" Before she could answer, footsteps echoed down the stairs. Two silhouettes appeared. Familiar shapes, familiar poise, familiar calm that isn't calm. He stood there, perfectly ironed, perfectly composed. And beside him, a woman who smelled of authority and expensive perfume. She gave me a polite smile, the kind que não alcança os olhos. He lifted a folder, tapping it once with his finger. "We need to talk," he said gently. "You knew this would catch up with you." Confusion twisted inside me. "What are you talking about?" "This is my home." His smile widened, almost sympathetic. "It was. But you signed the transfer, remember? Right before the wedding." I felt the world shift. "I never signed." The woman stepped forward, opening the folder. Inside was a contract. My name, my signature, everything looking impossibly real. Neighbors peeked from half-closed doors. Someone whispered. Someone else muttered that it was a shame, really. Such a young woman losing everything because of financial troubles. And while they painted me as unstable, irresponsible, hysterical, he just watched, calm, patient, as if waiting for me to break. But I didn't break. I stood there barefoot, tired, humiliated. And still, I kept my spine straight. Even when they dismissed me, even when a stranger living inside my home closed the door, as if I'd never existed. Dignity is strange. You don't feel it when you win. You feel it when you've lost almost everything and still refuse to bow. I walked away slowly, each step echoing with the truth I didn't want but finally had to face. Whatever was happening had been unfolding long before tonight, and I was only just beginning to understand the depth of it. I walked for so long that I stopped noticing the ache in my feet. The city blurred into shapes and sounds. Distant horns, a dog barking, the soft hum of a streetcar. I kept moving because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant collapsing. And I couldn't afford that. Not yet. The only clear thought in my mind was her face. A woman I barely knew, shaking as she told me to run. I needed answers. I needed someone in this city who wasn't tied to him. Alguém que não pudesse ser comprado ou intimidado. And she was the only person who had warned me, instead of watching me drown in silence. I found a bench near a closed pharmacy and dialed the number she had once scribbled on a receipt when I'd delivered flowers to her porch. I didn't expect her to answer. It was late, and I wasn't sure she even remembered me. But she picked up on the first ring. A breath. Then her voice, fragile but certain. "Are you safe?" No one had asked me that all night. My throat tightened. "I'm trying to be," I whispered. "Can I come to you?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes, I'll leave the light on." Her house sat in a quiet neighborhood where the trees leaned over the sidewalks like old guardians. When she opened the door, she stood small in the doorway, offering nothing but a blanket and a trembling smile, como alguém que já viu mais dor do que ousa admitir. Inside, she guided me to the couch, hands still shaking from everything she'd been forced to remember tonight. She poured me tea, though her own cup sat untouched. Only after I'd taken a sip did she sit across from me and fold her hands together, as if preparing to reopen wounds she had long buried. "I knew he'd find someone else," she murmured. "He always does." Those words sliced deeper than anything that had happened so far. She told me everything, not in a dramatic outburst, but in the quiet, almost reverent tone of someone describing a grave. Her daughter had once met a charming man, too, a man who made her feel safe, a man with a mother who held a respected government seat and used it as if power were a personal inheritance. The pattern was always the same: lonely women with properties, romance that felt like providencia, documents disguised as formalities, signatures acquired through trust. After that, disappearance, tragedy, an unfortunate accident that no one questioned. Her daughter had been the last before me, and as she spoke, a dark understanding unfurled inside me. Slow, heavy, inevitable. I wasn't a wife. I wasn't even a person in their eyes. I was an asset. My hands trembled around the teacup, but she reached across the table and held them steady. "You're not the first," she whispered, "but you can be the last." Those words planted something in me. Not hope, not yet, but a seed of resolve. Because surviving isn't enough quando alguém tenta apagar sua existência inteira. There is a moment, quiet, private, when a woman decides that fear will not dictate her ending. And sitting in that small living room, under the weight of another woman's grief, that moment arrived for me. Morning crept slowly through her curtains, casting a pale light across the table. I hadn't slept, but she insisted I eat something. I picked at the toast, mind drifting through everything I'd lost in a single night. My home, my savings, my reputation, minha normalidade. She watched me with a kind of protective determination I wasn't used to. "There's something you need to know," she said. "He didn't work alone. Not ever." She told me about the mother, the one with influence, connections, immunity built from years of favor trading. She forged documents, placed fake tenants, reassigned properties through back channels. She had power in the city's housing system, and no one questioned her. "People think wolves come in growls," the woman whispered. "But some come smiling." I felt anger rise, not fiery but cold, controlled, preciso, the type that doesn't destroy you but clarifies your next step. Before I could respond, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and every drop of color drained from her face. "They reported you on the morning news," she whispered. "They're saying you stole money from your job, that you're unstable, dangerous." The room tilted for a moment. It wasn't enough they had taken my home. They wanted to take my name too. She reached for my hand, steadying me again. "They want to isolate you," she said softly. "Predators always do before the strike." I lifted my chin, feeling that quiet steel settling back into place. "Then I won't let them." Her eyes softened with something like pride, the kind a woman shows when she recognizes the moment another woman rises. And that was the moment I understood. They had built a perfect trap, but they had underestimated the person they cornered. Morning light had barely settled over the city when I realized I couldn't hide anymore. News travels rápido demais em lugares onde ninguém olha pra você, até o dia em que você se torna a história. I needed to see what they were saying about me, not to torture myself, but to understand the shape of the battlefield. The woman who sheltered me insisted on driving. I didn't protest. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel, but her eyes remained firm, como alguém que já perdeu e não aceita perder outra vez. When we reached the florist shop where I'd worked for years, my stomach tightened. The windows were covered with fresh morning dew, soft and familiar, but the scene inside felt wrong the moment I stepped in. Conversation stopped. Eyes drifted toward me, some curious, some afraid, some quietly relieved that whatever storm I carried wasn't headed in their direction. My manager stood near the register, arms crossed, expression stiff. A cameraman hovered by the doorway, filming the arrangements as if beauty were a crime scene. And right in the middle of the shop, dressed in confidence and tailored elegance, stood the woman who had smiled at me in the hallway hours before. She had arrived first. Of course she had. She turned when she heard the door. Her face lit up with a warmth so artificial que podia muito bem ter sido pintada à mão. "There she is," she said softly, as though greeting a troubled child. "We've all been so worried." I felt every pair of eyes lean closer. My manager cleared his throat. "There were allegations made this morning." "Allegations?" I asked, though the word tasted like metal in my mouth. The elegant woman stepped forward, hands delicately clasped. "You took a large sum of money from the register yesterday," she said gently. "At least that's what the audit shows." A quiet gasp rippled through the room. My breath faltered, not from guilt, but from the sheer audacity. This wasn't random. This wasn't petty. This was surgical, precise, the kind of humiliation that only someone with practice could execute. "I never took anything," I said calmly, though my voice wavered at the edge. "You know I didn't." "Oh, sweetheart." She tilted her head. "Stress affects people differently. Sometimes we do things we don't realize we're doing." It was a performance, and the cameras were her audience. I felt the heat of shame crawl up my neck, not because her lies were convincing, but because I understood the strategy. Se você destruir a reputação de alguém primeiro, qualquer verdade que ela conte depois passa a soar como delírio. The woman who had sheltered me stepped forward, protective, but I placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Not now. Not here. Dignity doesn't fight where dignity can't win." My manager looked at me, not with anger, not even with disappointment, but with fear. Fear of the powerful woman standing inches away from him. "We'll have to let you go," he said softly. The words didn't hit me like a blow. They landed like dust, settling slowly, covering everything, suffocating if you breathed too deeply. The cameras moved in. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" one reporter asked. I looked at them, at all of them, and felt something inside me still. Not breaking, aligning. I took a breath, long and steady. "No," I said. "Not today." Because this wasn't the place to spill truth. Not with wolves dressed as philanthropists circling the room. Sometimes silence is not surrender. It's strategy. The elegant woman stepped closer, lowering her voice to a whisper only I could hear. "You should have stayed grateful," she murmured. "We could have made your life very comfortable." I turned my head, met her eyes, and spoke with a calm I didn't fully feel. "You mistake quiet for weakness." For the first time, a small crack fractured her perfect composure. I walked out without raising my voice, without defending myself, without giving them the spectacle they wanted. Outside, the air felt heavy but clean, as if humiliation had burned something off me I didn't need anymore. The woman who'd sheltered me hurried to my side. "You didn't deserve that," she whispered. I shook my head softly. "No one deserves it," I said. "But they did make one mistake." She looked at me, waiting. They showed me exactly how far they're willing to go. And knowing a predator's reach is the first step to surviving it. We sat in her car for a long moment after leaving the shop, both of us staring through the windshield as if the city might suddenly offer mercy. It didn't. Cities rarely do. They keep moving, indifferent to who breaks and who stands. I leaned my head back against the seat. My pulse was steady now, too steady, the kind of steadiness that comes not from peace, but from clarity. "They won't stop," she whispered. "People like them, they never stop until someone forces them to." Her voice shook, not for herself, but for me, for the familiar path she had watched her daughter walk before disappearing into silence, a silence I refused to enter. "I need proof," I murmured. "Something they can't bury." She nodded slowly, eyes fixed ahead. "There is proof, but getting it—" She swallowed. "It could cost you." I turned to her. "It already has." We drove back to her house. Inside, she spread papers across the kitchen table. Old letters, unexplained withdrawals, a timeline that only made sense when viewed through the lens of predation. Each detail pointed to the same truth. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. It was an industry. Polished, rehearsed, protected. Still, I needed more than stories and suspicions. I needed something irrefutable. And as fate would have it, that night, someone delivered it to me, without even meaning to. A knock sounded at the door. She froze. My breath caught. The world narrowed. When she opened it, a young woman from my old job stood in the doorway, eyes wide with guilt and fear. She clutched something in her hand, a small brass key. Her gaze darted around like someone being watched from the shadows. "I can't stay," she whispered. "I wasn't supposed to give you this." "What is it?" I asked softly. She pressed the key into my palm, a quick, desperate move, and stepped back. "Her office," she breathed. "The cleaning staff finds things they're not allowed to speak about. He follows them. He threatens their families. But my cousin said she keeps a book, a gray one. She writes everything down. Names, dates, addresses, all of it." My heart thudded once, deep, low, final. The woman behind the elaborate lies kept a record. Arrogance always leaves paper trails. Before I could thank the girl, she hurried away, practically running down the porch steps. I closed the door quietly, turning the key over in my hand. A single object, cold, small, unassuming. But power often comes disguised in ordinary metal. The woman watching me whispered, "If that book exists, it will destroy them. Then it's time to find it." We planned carefully, not loudly, not dramatically. Our voices stayed low, our movements slow, as if the house itself were listening. I'd spent my life avoiding risks. She had spent hers surviving them. Between the two of us, caution became its own language. We waited until the city grew sleepy and indifferent. That hour quando as luzes de rua piscam devagar, e o mundo parece esquecer que você existe. She drove. I memorized the key's weight. The government building rose before us, wide and polished, a monument to respectability built on shadows. Its glass doors reflected our silhouettes, two women who had lost too much to turn back. Inside, the lobby was dim. Security rotations were predictable. She knew them from years of bringing documents for her daughter's appeals, always being dismissed, always being told that things take time. We slipped through a side entrance her cousin had described. The corridor smelled of cleaning products and old carpet. My heart raced, but my steps stayed even. Her office door waited at the end, wooden, lacquered, adorned with her title. It looked expensive, important, untouchable. I slipped the key into the lock. It turned. The click was soft, yet it echoed like a verdict. Inside, everything was spotless. Too spotless. A desk without clutter, a wall of awards, a framed portrait of her shaking hands with city leaders, smiling as if she had ever saved a single life. We moved quietly, opening drawers, checking behind ledgers. Nothing. I knelt beside the bookshelf, running my hand along the spines. Hardcovers, regulations, policy manuals. Nothing gray, until I noticed the painting on the wall. A city skyline. The same skyline framed at the restaurant where this nightmare started. A detail repeated is rarely accidental. When I lifted it, the hinges groaned. Behind it, a safe, a code panel, 4 digits. The The woman beside me inhaled sharply. Her mother used to brag about the year the agency opened. She said it was the year her family's legacy began. I typed the year. The safe clicked open. Inside, sitting alone like a crown on a velvet cushion, was a small gray notebook. I reached for it, hands steady, breath unbroken. Because sometimes survival demands silence. But justice requires evidence. And tonight, I finally had it in my hands. The gray notebook felt heavier than its size allowed, as if every page carried the weight of women who never got the chance to speak for themselves. I held it close, breathing in a silence I didn't recognize. Not fear, not shock. Something steadier. Something that whispered, "Don't waste this chance." We didn't turn on the lights. The glow from the street lamps outside was enough to guide our hands as we flipped through the first pages. Names written in elegant handwriting. Dates marked with careful precision. Small notes beside each entry. Coded, deliberate, cruelly organized. Relocated. Accidental death. Unstable behavior. Leverage successful. Asset transferred. Pending. And there, on the final page, written with calm certainty, in progress. My initials, my address, my life reduced to a status. The woman beside me pressed a hand to her mouth, holding in a gasp that trembled through her whole body. I swallowed hard, forcing air into my lungs even as the room seemed to tighten around me. "This is enough," I whispered. "More than enough." She nodded, but her eyes flicked to the door. "We need to leave. Now." I pulled out my phone to take photos, but the battery flashed red, 1%. I curled my fingers around it, steadying my breath. Just enough for this. Page after page. Click. 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 The light began to dim. The kind of dim that warns you time is running out. I took the last photo just as the screen went black. My reflection stared back at me from the dark glass, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw something new in my own eyes. Resolve. Quiet. Mature. Unshakable. I slipped the notebook back into the safe, not out of fear, but strategy. If they didn't know it had been touched, they wouldn't move to hide or destroy it yet. But the photos? Those were mine. And soon, they would be more than proof. They would be truth with teeth. We were just about to leave when the woman's hand gripped my arm, firm, urgent. "Listen." Footsteps, 2 sets, approaching fast. My pulse stumbled. She looked around wildly until her gaze landed on a utility closet across the hall. "In here," she whispered. We darted out of the office, turning the lock without letting it click, and slipped into the closet just as the footsteps reached the doorway. Inside, the air smelled of bleach and metal. I held my breath, every muscle tightening. The notebook's images burned into my eyes. The voices were muffled but familiar. Too familiar. His voice, smooth, calm, calculated. "She won't get far. Her accounts are frozen. Her home is gone. She has nothing." The elegant woman's voice followed, clipped and cold. "And the press? They believe she stole from the shop. At this point, it doesn't matter what she says." He chuckled, a sound so casual it made my stomach turn. "She'll disappear soon enough. These matters resolve themselves. Resolve themselves. Like the other women." The woman beside me trembled, but I placed a hand over hers, steadying her the way she had steadied me. Because I understood then, the moment they believed I had no more moves left, was the moment I became dangerous. Their footsteps moved deeper into the office. We didn't breathe until the silence grew thick again. "We need to go," she murmured. We slipped out of the closet, keeping close to the wall, every instinct sharpened. I led her down the corridor, toward the side exit we'd entered through. But just as my hand touched the cold metal bar of the door, a shout echoed behind us. "Hey, who's there?" We ran. The cold night slammed into us as we pushed through the exit and into the parking lot. Our steps pounded against the pavement, breath tearing out of our chests, the world blurring around us. I didn't dare look back. Sometimes looking back slows you down. By the time we reached the car, my entire body trembled with adrenaline, fear, and something I had almost forgotten how to feel. Power. She started the engine with shaking hands. We sped away, not stopping until the building shrank into a distant structure swallowed by darkness. Only then did she speak. "You have the photos," she whispered. "You have everything." I nodded, staring at my hands that hours earlier had been helpless. Now they held the ruin of 2 predators. "Not yet," I said quietly. "But soon," because survival had shifted. This was no longer about escaping their trap. This was about ending it. We didn't go back to her house right away. Some instinct, old, primal, the kind women inherit through generations, warned me that returning to familiar places too quickly was dangerous. Predators double back. Predators watch the exits. Predators assume you'll run home. So we didn't. Instead, we drove to a 24-hour laundromat tucked behind a faded gas station, the kind of place where no one asks questions, because no one cares enough to. The hum of the dryers filled the air like a heartbeat. I sat in the back corner, phone lifeless in my hands, the weight of the photos resting somewhere between my ribs and my resolve. She sat in the plastic chair beside me, palms pressed together, eyes fixed on the linoleum floor. "You should rest," she whispered. "I can't," I said softly. "Not until I know how bad it is." She nodded. Pain recognized pain. I plugged my phone into an outlet near one of the dryers and waited. When the screen finally lit up, I opened the photo gallery, and relief swept through me so intensely I almost sagged in my chair. Every image was there, clear, legible, undeniable. But the victory was small and temporary, because proof means nothing if the world refuses to listen. And I knew. They would not let these images see daylight willingly. When we finally returned to her house, dawn was bleeding into the sky. Exhaustion hung heavy on us. But as soon as I stepped inside, something tugged at me. A quiet unease. I scanned the room. Nothing looked disturbed. Nothing broken. No sign of forced entry. But something felt wrong. She must have sensed it too, because her voice sharpened. "Stay by the door." I didn't listen. Instead, I walked toward the dining table where we had planned everything the night before. A single item lay there, placed neatly at the table's center. A folded piece of paper. My pulse tripped. She approached slowly, as if afraid the page might detonate. When she opened it, a trembling breath escaped her. 3 words were written in thick black ink. "We see you." My skin went cold, not from fear, but from recognition. This wasn't a threat meant to scare us into retreat. It was a declaration, a line drawn. They knew. They were watching, and they were confident enough to admit it. "She was right," I whispered. "They won't stop." Her eyes glistened, but her voice stayed steady. "Neither will we." Before we could speak further, her phone rang, loud in the silence, jarring enough to make both of us flinch. She answered, voice quivering. A man's voice crackled through the speaker. Urgent. Breathless. "Auntie? Are you home?" It was her nephew, the one she had mentioned only briefly. He worked nights, rarely called, never at dawn. "I'm here," she said. "What's wrong?" "You need to get out," he said. "Now. Someone was at my door asking where you live. A man, tall, shaved head. He said it was about unfinished paperwork. But, Auntie, he knew my name." I closed my eyes for a moment, steadying the tremor in my chest. They weren't hiding anymore. They weren't pretending. Her nephew's voice cracked. "Please leave. Please." She promised him she would. When she hung up, she looked at me, and for the first time since meeting her, she looked afraid in a way that pierced me. "They're circling," she murmured, "like they did before." I stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulders, grounding both of us. Then we moved before they close in. We packed fast, only essentials. Documents, the flash drive, the phone, a few clothes. The life she once protected within these walls was now a liability. When we stepped outside, I scanned the street. Calm, quiet, deceptively ordinary. But predators don't always stand in plain sight. They hide in stillness, in silence. As she locked the door for what might be the last time, she whispered, I can't lose another daughter. The way she said daughter broke something inside me, but it also rebuilt something stronger. You won't, I promised. We got into the car and pulled away from the curb. Slow, controlled, dignified. Even fleeing, there was grace in her posture, and I adopted it like armor. We drove nowhere at first. Just kept moving, letting distance buy time. Only when we reached an empty parking lot behind an abandoned movie theater did she pull over. Where do we go now? She asked. I looked at my phone, the images glowing like fragile lanterns against darkness. We go where they least expect us. And where is that? I turned toward her, voice steadying into something new. Not soft, not shaken, but resolute. To the last place they think I'd dare go. She blinked, confused, until understanding dawned in her eyes. The housing agency, the event, the stage where the woman behind all this would be honored. If we want the world to believe us, I whispered, we expose them where everyone is watching. Her breath hitched. Fear, yes, but something else too. Pride. You're not running anymore, she said. No, I replied. I'm reclaiming. Because dignity isn't silence. Dignity is choosing the moment you finally speak. And mine was coming. By the time the sun had fully lifted, the world felt sharper, every sound too loud, every shadow too long. But inside me, something had settled. Not calm, not comfort. A steadiness born from having nothing left to lose. There is a point in a woman's life when fear turns into direction. I had crossed that line hours ago. We drove toward the edge of the city, where the streets widened and the noise softened. The plan wasn't complete, not yet, but the shape of it had formed in my mind like a flower opening under heat. Painful, inevitable, purposeful. We need allies, I murmured, staring out the window at houses I used to think belonged to safer lives. She glanced at me briefly. Who would believe us? Not the powerful, I said, but the ones who were never given the chance to speak. Victims don't disappear. Their stories just get buried. And I wasn't going to let those stories stay underground. We stopped at a small diner near the freeway, the kind that hadn't changed its menu or its curtains in decades. The neon sign flickered against the morning light. Inside, a waitress refilled coffee cups with the precision of someone who'd done it since before I was born. I asked for a booth in the back, where the vinyl squeaked under us, and the air smelled of syrup and frying butter. The woman across from me kept her hands around her mug like she needed its warmth to keep breathing. I connected my phone to the charger we'd brought, and waited until it powered on. The photos appeared one by one. The notebook, the names, the coded notes beside each entry. 8 women. 8 lives. 8 stories stolen and repackaged as misfortune. They'll deny everything, she whispered. They'll say you fabricated it. They'll twist every angle. I know, I said. That's why we need more than proof. What else is there? Witnesses. I turned the phone toward her. People who will say the names out loud. She stared at the screen, eyes shining not from fear this time, but grief. The families. They never got answers. They never got closure. Just silence. Then we break the silence. Her breath shook. You think they'll come? If they see what we have. I paused, letting the truth settle. They'll come. Because nothing is louder than a mother denied justice. Nothing is stronger than a family robbed of truth. We spent the next hours driving, knocking on doors, leaving envelopes where no one answered, speaking gently to people whose eyes widened the moment they recognized a name from the notebook. I didn't reveal everything, just enough to let them know the silence had cracks now. Enough to let them feel the tremor of justice approaching. Some cried. Some shook with rage. Some simply nodded, grief turning into direction. We'll be there, they said. Every single one. By the time noon stretched across the sky, we had gathered a small army of quiet anger, the kind that doesn't shout, but arrives exactly when the world finally needs to listen. When we returned to the car, she sank into the seat, exhausted. This is dangerous, she whispered. They'll try to silence you. They already tried. She looked at me with something like awe. Not admiration, not fear, but recognition. A woman who had lost everything once was watching another refuse to lose again. "We still need a way in," she said. "That event. The security alone." "I know someone," I said softly. Her head lifted. "Who?" I hesitated only a moment before saying it. "Her nephew." The woman straightened. "He'll help?" "He wants the truth," I said. "And he's not afraid of them anymore." We found him at his small apartment, still shaken from the man who had come to his door earlier. But when he saw us, and when he saw the photos, fear hardened into purpose. "I'll get you inside," he said quietly. "But once you're in, you'll be on your own." "I know." He looked at his aunt, and something unspoken passed between them, a wound reopening, but healing at the same time. "You're sure?" he asked her. She nodded once. Firm. Then he turned to me. "You speak," he said, "and I'll make sure the cameras can't look away." As we left his apartment, she walked a step behind me, her breath shaking but her posture straight. "You remind me of her," she whispered. I paused, turning. "Your daughter?" "Yes." Her eyes glistened. She fought quietly, until she couldn't. I reached for her hand, not out of pity, but solidarity. "I'll fight quietly too," I said. "But I won't disappear." She squeezed my fingers, frail but fierce. "Then neither will she." The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the pavement. We stood in the light of the doorway, two women scarred by the same predator, holding onto a truth larger than fear. "Tomorrow," I said, "we end this." She nodded, wiping a tear with the back of her hand. "Tomorrow," she repeated, "you take back your name." And for the first time in days, I believed it. Morning arrived with a heavy quiet that did not feel like peace. It felt like a warning, the kind of silence that hangs right before something breaks. I woke on the couch in the apartment of the nephew. The thin blanket was still wrapped around my legs, and for a moment I did not know where I was. Then everything rushed back. The notebook, the photos, the threats, the families who said they would come, and the event that would change everything. The woman who had sheltered me sat by the window watching the empty street as if danger might appear out of the morning light. She looked tired in a way that went beyond sleep. Her nephew moved carefully in the kitchen, making coffee with hands that still shook from the night before. We were three people tied together by fear, loss, and a need for truth. When I stood, they looked at me with something that felt almost sacred. Not pity, not worry. Something closer to respect. Something that said they believed I could do what needed to be done. I told them we would move with caution. Dignity demands steady steps, even on the edge of collapse. We gathered around the kitchen table to review the plan. Everything rested on a fragile balance of timing, courage, and luck. I spread the printed photos of the notebook across the surface. Each photo showed another life taken or stolen. Another woman. Another family left with silence. Her nephew placed a list beside them, the names of the people who had promised to come and stand with us. Then we reviewed the path inside the event, the doors we would use, the moments when hesitation could cost everything. Her nephew handed me a badge. It was simple, laminated and real. It identified me as a temporary staff member assigned to maintenance support. I held it in my hand and felt its weight. I asked him if it was safe. He told me the truth. Nothing about today was safe, but this was the safest door available. I found strength in that honesty. We left the apartment together. The city felt different that morning. People walked quickly, cars rushed by, and everyone seemed unaware that a storm was gathering among them. I kept my jacket closed and my head down. The woman who had sheltered me walked on my right. Her nephew walked on my left. I had never felt more watched or more protected. The event took place at the Central Forum, a building that loved to show its importance. Tall pillars, stone walls polished to shine, banners hanging from every corner celebrating public service and community leadership. Words that meant nothing when spoken by those who used them only as decoration. Inside, guests drifted around the marble floor with easy laughter and polished clothes. Some carried champagne glasses even though it was still morning. Others whispered to each other with the certainty of people who believe the world bends in their direction. They admired flower arrangements that reminded me of the life I used to have. A simple life. An honest one. The elegant woman was near the stage greeting officials with her perfect smile. The son stood just behind her, adjusting his jacket with the calmness of someone who had never imagined losing anything. They did not see me. Not yet. Her nephew pressed a cap and a black jacket into my hands so I could blend in with the other workers. My breath deepened as I put them on. The disguise was simple, but sometimes simplicity is the best protection. He told me to stay near the door behind the stage until he signaled. Once the moment arrived, I needed to walk to the microphone without hesitation. I asked him what would happen if they tried to stop me. He said he would stand between us long enough for me to speak. His courage steadied mine. From backstage, I could see the crowd settling into their seats. The elegant woman checked the microphone with delicate fingers. The son adjusted his tie. Reporters arranged their cameras. The woman who had sheltered me stood quietly near the back wall, her eyes locked on mine. It looked like she was holding her breath for both of us. The host began speaking. His voice carried easily across the hall, lifting the elegant woman's name like a trophy. He listed her accomplishments, her years of service, her dedication to the city. The lies rolled smoothly, polished by repetition. Her nephew touched my wrist. His voice was barely a whisper. "This is your moment." My breath steadied. My spine lifted. Everything in me aligned. I stepped onto the side platform. Each step sounded louder in my head than in the room. The host continued speaking, unaware that the truth was already moving toward the stage. The elegant woman looked at the audience with a smile that belonged to someone who believed she was untouchable. Then she saw me. The moment her eyes met mine, the smile faltered. Her son saw me next. His face tightened, fear slipping through the cracks of his confidence. I reached the podium. I wrapped my hand around the microphone. The room grew quiet, confused and curious. And I spoke the words that would break everything open. "I have something to say." The microphone felt warm beneath my fingers, as if the room itself were holding its breath. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then a soft current rippled through the audience. That small, restless murmur people make when something unexpected enters a space built for control. I could feel the elegant woman watching me, her gaze sharp enough to cut glass. The son shifted his weight, the first crack in his careful composure showing in the way his jaw tightened. I did not raise my voice. I did not let anger shape my words. I spoke with the quiet steadiness of someone who has nothing left to hide and nothing left to fear. I said that I once believed I had married into a life of safety. I said that I had trusted a man who smiled gently, and a woman who spoke with the tone of someone who always wins. I said that trust can become a weapon when placed in the wrong hands. And as I spoke, the room leaned in. Curiosity, confusion, doubt, recognition. It all shifted like smoke above a candle flame. I lifted the first printed photo, holding it high enough for the cameras to capture it. The image showed a page of the gray notebook, the handwriting elegant and cold. I read the first name written there. A soft gasp moved across the audience. Someone whispered. Someone else covered their mouth with their hand. I did not look away. I read the next name, then the next, and the next. Each name carried a weight larger than the room could hold. When I finished the list, I told them these were not accidents. These were not tragedies. These were not unfortunate coincidences that polite society likes to sweep beneath a clean rug. These were lives targeted, manipulated, and erased by two people with enough influence to hide the truth for years. The elegant woman stepped forward, still composed, still graceful, but her smile had become stiff. She said my name with a tone that tried to shrink me. She told the audience that I was confused, that I had suffered stress, that I was unstable. She asked them to sit down and let the program continue, but the room did not sit. Her son called for security. 2 guards rushed toward the stage, but her nephew intercepted them, flashing the badge he had shown earlier. His voice carried authority, not volume. He told them to stand back. Cameras swiveled instantly, the air thickening with anticipation. I lifted the final photo. the one that held my initials beside the words in progress. That was the moment the first woman in the audience stood. Then another. Then another. Each one had seen those names before on missing person posters, on old articles, on hospital reports that never made sense. Mothers, sisters, cousins, neighbors, women who had been told to accept loss without answers. One woman near the aisle called out that she recognized her niece in the records. Another said she remembered the daughter of a friend who vanished after a sudden romance. Voices rose, not in chaos, but in shared grief. The truth was no longer mine alone. It belonged to the room now. The elegant woman tried to regain control, but her voice lost its certainty. She insisted the notebook was fabricated. She claimed I had stolen documents. She tried to paint me as dangerous. But the audience had already shifted. Some whispered to reporters. Others pulled out their phones. A few stepped closer to the stage, faces tight with fury and sorrow. The son stepped toward me, anger finally cracking through his calm. He told me to hand over the photos. He said I did not understand the damage I was causing. I looked at him steadily and said that the damage had been caused long before I arrived on that stage. Then the doors at the back of the room opened. People poured in from the hallway, carrying framed photos of the women who never returned home, flowers tucked behind the frames, candles still unlit but ready. Her nephew had told them where to enter, where to stand, how to be seen. They moved with quiet precision, the way grief sometimes teaches people to move. Reporters surged forward. Cameras flashed like lightning. The elegant woman stepped back, her mask slipping in slow, painful pieces. The son looked around wildly, realizing the room was no longer under their influence. The host of the event tried to speak, but no one listened. I kept my voice steady when I said the notebook was hidden in her office behind a painting. I said the safe code was the year the agency was founded. I said anyone could go there now and see it for themselves. Evidence does not need volume. It needs certainty. And certainty pulsed in every word. Someone in the audience shouted for law enforcement. Another demanded an investigation. A third said the mayor was on his way, because he had been watching the live broadcast. The elegant woman opened her mouth to speak again, but the crowd no longer cared for her explanations. Truth had fallen into the room like a stone through glass. I stepped back from the microphone. My heart raced, but my breathing stayed calm. I did not shout. I did not accuse with rage. I simply let the truth breathe in front of everyone. And the truth, once seen, refuses to be unseen. The moment I stepped back from the microphone, the room erupted into a kind of storm that had nothing to do with noise. It was the storm that arrives when truth finally breaks the surface after years buried under polished lies. People stood. People cried. People shouted questions that the elegant woman could no longer shape into silence. Her son tried to move toward me again, but the guards hesitated now, unsure who actually held authority in a room that no longer obeyed the old rules. I felt the air shift when the first wave of families reached the front. They did not run. They did not scream. They moved with the slow determination of grief that has been denied too long. One woman held a framed photo of someone who looked impossibly young. She lifted it high. Not to me, but to the elegant woman. You said she left on her own. The words hung in the air without being spoken. Others followed, faces carved by years of unanswered questions. Eyes carrying pain so deep it had settled into their bones. They stood shoulder to shoulder, forming a line of quiet truth that the elegant woman could not interrupt. Her son tried to dismiss them, saying none of this proved anything. He insisted the notebook was fiction. He told the audience that I had manipulated vulnerable families. But every word he spoke only tightened the noose around their deception, because his voice no longer echoed. It cracked. Her nephew slipped behind the stage to speak with the reporters, handing them copies of the photos I had printed hours earlier. He pointed toward the families holding their framed memories. He pointed toward the doorway where more people were entering, drawn by the rising tide of voices inside the hall. The press crowd thickened, cameras lifted, microphones extended. No angle favored the elegant woman anymore. The elegant woman stepped forward, lifting her chin with the last fragment of her practiced poise. She said the accusations were cruel. She said I had fabricated everything to cover my own instability. She said her decades of service spoke louder than my claims. But the mayor arrived before she could finish. His presence changed the room instantly. He walked with the heavy steps of someone summoned into a crisis he could no longer ignore. He did not shake her hand. He looked directly at me. His eyes scanned the printed photos. He examined the notebook page showing my initials. And then he looked at the line of families standing in front of the stage. There was no speech in him, only the kind of stillness that precedes action. He ordered law enforcement to detain the elegant woman and her son for questioning. The words fell calmly from his lips, but the effect was immediate. 2 officers moved toward them. The son stepped back, insisting they could not arrest him without cause. The elegant woman pointed at me with trembling fury, saying I was orchestrating a smear campaign. But dignity does not tremble, and dignity was no longer on their side. The officers took her by the arms first. Her son tried to pull her away, but another officer blocked him. The crowd parted slowly as they were led toward the exit. Some people watched in stunned silence. Others watched with a grief that finally had a place to go. The families followed behind them, not to gloat, but because truth had finally been recognized by someone with power. When the doors closed behind the officers, the room exhaled. It was not joy. It was not triumph. It was release. A release so heavy it left the air trembling. The woman who had sheltered me walked toward the stage. She moved carefully, one step at a time, as if approaching something sacred. Her nephew followed closely behind her, ready to hold her steady if needed. But she did not wobble. She did not falter. She reached me and placed her palm against my cheek with a tenderness that made my eyes sting. She whispered that her daughter would have been proud. Her voice broke around the words, but her spine stayed straight. She said I had given her something she thought she would never see again, an ending that belonged to truth. Reporters pressed forward, asking questions, shouting for statements. I shook my head softly. I told them that justice does not begin with the loudest voice, but with the most honest one. I told them the families deserved the first word, that the women taken deserved more than headlines, and that dignity meant letting their stories rise before mine. The mayor returned to the stage and asked the audience to exit calmly. He promised an investigation beginning immediately. He said the evidence would be seized and reviewed within the hour. He said he would make sure the families were heard. I stepped away from the podium, the weight of the day settling into my bones. I felt tired, but not defeated. Worn, but not small. My life had cracked open, but I was still standing. The woman who had sheltered me took my hand as we walked out of the hall together in silence. And in that silence, for the first time since the night everything began, I felt something that almost resembled peace. We stepped out of the forum into a late afternoon light that felt almost unreal, como se o mundo lá fora ainda não soubesse o que tinha acabado de acontecer lá dentro. The air was cooler than I expected, carrying that crisp edge the city gets when evening begins to settle over stone and glass. People moved along the sidewalks as if nothing extraordinary had unfolded a few feet away. Life always keeps moving, even when your own has been torn apart and remade in a single day. The woman who had sheltered me walked silently at my side. Her nephew stayed close, glancing behind us every now and then, not out of fear, but out of habit. When someone has been hunted before, they learn to watch the spaces most people ignore. We crossed the plaza slowly. I felt the weight of the past days pulling at my muscles, but inside me something had started to loosen. Not relief, not victory. Something quieter. Something that whispered that I was no longer running. A woman who stops running begins to reclaim herself. We reached the car, and none of us spoke until we were inside with the doors shut. The nephew finally exhaled, long and shaky. "You did it," he said. I looked at him, feeling the words settle somewhere delicate. "I did something," I replied. "But justice is bigger than a moment. Now it needs to continue without fear." He nodded, gripping the steering wheel as if steadying himself. His aunt placed her hand gently on his arm and told him he had been brave. He looked down, swallowing hard. Courage rarely feels like courage when you are living it. It feels like trembling, and hoping you do not collapse before the ground catches you. He drove us away from the forum, taking back streets instead of main roads. The woman beside me watched out the window, her face softened by exhaustion and something deeper. After several minutes, she whispered that she wished her daughter could have been there. I turned toward her, unable to respond at first. Pain that deep has no easy answer. She continued speaking, her voice quiet and steady. She said her daughter had once stood up to someone powerful too, though not with microphones or crowds, but in smaller, quieter ways. And she said that seeing me stand on that stage felt like watching her daughter's voice rise again after years of silence. Her hand trembled as she reached for mine, and I held it without a word. We drove to the nephew's apartment, but as soon as we pulled up, a sudden thought struck me. I did not want to go inside. Not yet. Not while the air still felt charged with everything that had just unfolded. I asked him to keep driving, just for a little while. He didn't question it. He simply put the car back into gear and pulled away from the curb. We passed storefronts beginning to close for the evening, lights flickering off one by one. We passed a group of teenagers laughing on the corner, their joy bright and careless. We passed a man selling roasted nuts from a metal cart, steam rising into the fading light. All of it felt strangely beautiful in its ordinariness. After days of fear so thick it almost suffocated me, the simple parts of the city felt like promises. Eventually, the nephew asked where I wanted to go. I looked ahead at the long stretch of road and felt a pull toward something familiar. "Take me to the flower shop," I said softly. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "You sure?" I nodded. "Yes. I need to see it with my own eyes." The shop was closed by the time we arrived. The windows reflected the golden light of the street lamps, casting soft shadows across the petals and stems inside. I stepped out of the car and stood on the sidewalk, breathing in the faint scent that still lingered around the door. It felt like stepping back into a version of myself I had almost forgotten. The woman joined me. She stood close, but not too close, giving me space to feel whatever needed to come. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I pressed my hand lightly against the window, and a memory rose. Mornings arranging bouquets, afternoons laughing with coworkers, evenings locking up while the city settled into dusk. This place held the last peaceful version of my life. But I was not the same woman who once opened this door every morning. I turned toward her and whispered that I would rebuild. Not the same life. Not the same dreams. Something steadier. Something that could not be stolen with forged papers or gentle lies. She smiled through tired eyes. "You already started rebuilding the moment you spoke the truth." Her nephew leaned against the car, watching us quietly. I walked back toward him, feeling something in my chest ease. I thanked him for standing beside me when he had no obligation to. He shook his head and said he did it for his aunt, for the women whose names were in that notebook, and for the city he wanted to believe in again. I felt the truth of his words settle like a promise. As we stood there, the evening light wrapped the street in a soft gold. Cars passed slowly. A breeze carried the scent of jasmine from somewhere nearby. For the first time since everything began, I felt the sharp edges of fear loosen their grip. Not disappear, just loosen. Healing never arrives all at once. It comes quietly, like a soft wind moving through a doorway you forgot was open. When we finally drove away, I looked back at the flower shop one more time. I was leaving behind a life that had been taken from me, but I was also moving toward a life I was ready to choose. Night had already settled across the city by the time we reached her nephew's apartment again. The streetlights cast long streaks of gold across the pavement, and for a moment, everything felt strangely gentle, as if the world were trying to wrap the day in a softer ending than it deserved. I stepped out of the car slowly, not because I was afraid, but because my body was still learning how to exist without the weight of immediate danger pressing against it. Inside, the apartment was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that arrives after a storm. You are still trying to believe is real. The woman who had sheltered me lowered herself onto the couch with a long breath, her shoulders relaxing in a way I had not seen since the night she first warned me. Her nephew locked the door and checked it twice. Old habits, he murmured, and I understood. I walked to the window and opened it just a little. The night air drifted in, cool and steady, carrying the city's distant hum. A bus engine groaning, someone laughing on the corner, a dog barking 2 streets away. After days filled with threats, whispers, and footsteps in the dark, normal life sounded like a blessing. Her nephew handed me a glass of water. I thanked him and sank into the chair across from the couch. None of us spoke for a long time. Silence was no longer heavy. It was necessary. She was the first to break it. In a voice soft as a touch, she told me that what happened in that auditorium was more than justice. It was a resurrection of stories that had been buried too deep for too long. She said she saw the moment the truth finally began to breathe again. She said she saw her daughter in the way I stood, not with rage, but with certainty. I looked at her, feeling my throat tighten. I told her that everything I had done because she told me the truth when it could have cost her everything. I told her that courage is not loud. It is the quiet decision to trust someone in the moment when trust feels like a risk, and she had taken that risk first. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she did not wipe it away. Dignity allows for softness. It is not the absence of tears. It is the strength to let them fall in peace. Her nephew sat beside her. He spoke about the families who had rushed to the stage, about the weight of their grief and the way they stood together like a shield against the lies. He said he never thought he would see something like that in his lifetime. I told him that justice is often born from desperation, but it grows from unity. And today, unity had taken center stage. We talked until the words began to fade, replaced by exhaustion that could not be ignored. I stood, intending to go to the small guest room he had offered earlier, but when I reached the doorway, I stopped. A thought that had been glimmering quietly inside me finally rose to the surface. I turned back to them and said that tomorrow I would return to my apartment. Not because I trusted the walls, not because I wanted to reclaim furniture or belongings, but because that apartment had been taken from me through deception, and stepping through that door again would be an act of choosing myself, not the fear they tried to place inside me. The woman looked at me with concern and pride woven together. She asked if I was sure. I nodded. I said that a home is not the same once someone tries to steal it, but sometimes the act of standing inside it again can rewrite what was broken. Not fully, not perfectly, but enough. Her nephew said he would go with me. I told him yes, not out of fear, out of caution and respect for the journey ahead. When the conversation drifted to silence again, I finally stepped into the guest room. The bed was small, the blanket thin, but to me it felt like a palace. Safety is not measured by luxury. It is measured by breath. And tonight, for the first time in days, I could breathe without listening for footsteps outside the door. I lay there in the dark, eyes open, thoughts moving slowly and softly. I thought about the notebook and the weight of every name inside it. I thought about the families who lifted photos of the women they loved. I thought about the moment her voice cracked when she said her daughter would have been proud. And I thought about the stage where I had spoken not with rage, but with dignity. Before sleep finally pulled me under, one last thought settled deep inside me. Tomorrow would not be about reclaiming what I lost. It would be the first day of building something new. And this time, no one would take it from me. Morning light touched my face before I was fully awake. That soft kind of light that takes its time entering a room. For a moment I did not move. I let myself lie still, listening to the quiet inside the apartment. No hurried footsteps. No sharp knocks at the door. No voices trying to reshape my life into something small and frightened. Just calm. Just breath. Just the beginning of a day that no longer belonged to them. I rose slowly and stepped into the living room. The woman who had sheltered me was already awake, sitting in the chair by the window with a cup of tea held gently between her palms. Her nephew stood near the stove cooking eggs, his movements steady and familiar. They both looked up when they heard me. "You slept," she said softly. Her voice held something warm, almost relieved. I nodded. The first real sleep I have had since everything began. She smiled, and for the first time the smile reached her eyes. We ate breakfast together without rush. The food tasted simple, honest. The nephew spoke about the messages he had received overnight. Reporters, families, people from the community who said they had watched the broadcast. Many had demanded a full investigation. Some had offered help. Others simply wrote that they believed us. Belief. Such a small word. Such a powerful shift. After we finished eating, I stood and said that I was ready. The woman beside me rose more slowly, but with more strength than the day before. Her nephew grabbed the keys and we walked together toward the car. The city outside felt different. Not safer exactly, but clearer. The fog of deception that had wrapped itself around my life had begun to lift, and the sunlight did not feel like a threat. It felt like a chance. The drive to my apartment was quiet. The streets passed by in long, steady lines. I watched the familiar blocks come into view, each one holding memories of a life I had once believed was unshakable. When we finally parked outside my building, I stepped out and felt a tremor move through my hands. Not fear, something older, something rooted. The woman placed her hand on my back gently. "You walk when you are ready," she whispered. I took a long breath, then moved toward the entrance. The hallway was exactly as I remembered. The smell of old paint, the distant sound of someone boiling water behind a closed door, a neighbor humming softly. Nothing extraordinary, yet everything had changed. I reached my door. The lock had been repaired since they forced me out. The metal gleamed faintly under the hallway light. I rested my fingers against it and let the memory of that night wash through me, not to reopen the wound, but to acknowledge how far I had come. She stood behind me, her nephew beside her. Together we waited for whatever would happen next. I slid the key into the lock. It turned easily. The door opened. The apartment smelled like dust and faint flowers, as if the place itself had been holding its breath since I left. I stepped inside slowly. My eyes traveled across the familiar space, the couch in its old position, the shelf with the small pottery pieces, the framed photo on the desk, the sunlight filtering through curtains I had chosen years ago. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same, because I was not the same. Her nephew checked each room with quiet care. When he returned, he nodded. All clear. The woman walked in behind me, studying the walls, the windows, the worn rug. She whispered that spaces remember the people who pass through them. She said this home had remembered me even through the lies. I moved to the center of the room and lowered myself onto the couch. The cushions gave under my weight in the same familiar way. I placed my hands on my knees and breathed slowly, allowing the moment to settle inside me. "You are home," she murmured. I nodded, not because the words were entirely true yet, but because they were beginning to become true. We stayed there for a while. No rush. No fear pressing at the edges. Just 3 people sharing the quiet of a space reclaimed. Eventually, her nephew said we needed to go to the station to give official statements. I told him yes, but not yet. I wanted one more minute inside the life that had been taken from me, so I could feel the difference between losing something and choosing to rebuild it. I walked to the window and opened it. The city air drifted in gently, carrying the scent of morning pastries from the bakery down the street. I closed my eyes for a second, letting the breeze wash across my skin. When I opened them again, the woman was watching me with a softness I will never forget. "You stood on that stage," she said, "but this is the moment you truly claimed yourself again." I stepped toward her and took her hand. "Thank you," I whispered, "for the warning, for the shelter, for believing me before anyone else did." She squeezed my fingers lightly. "Truth recognizes truth," she said. We walked out of the apartment together, closing the door behind us, not as an ending, as a beginning. What had been stolen was now mine again, and so was the woman I had become. I returned to the apartment later that afternoon, not to reclaim objects, but to understand what it meant to stand again in a space where I had once felt safe. The light through the curtains looked almost the same as the day I first moved in, carrying that soft golden tone that touches everything with a quiet grace. I walked slowly across the room, letting my fingertips skim the back of the couch, the edge of the table, the frame of the window. Each familiar corner reminded me of the life I had built before lies tried to swallow it whole. I sat on the floor where sunlight warmed the wooden boards. For a long moment, I simply breathed, and the silence moved around me like a gentle tide. It was strange to realize that the same silence that once felt like fear now felt like permission. Permission to stay. Permission to heal. Permission to begin again without rushing to erase the scars of these last days. My thoughts drifted back to that first night in the restaurant. The scent of rosemary on my wrists. The soft glow of chandeliers. The moment the stem snapped between my fingers. I remembered the fear pressing into my ribs, the warning from a stranger who risked everything to save me. And I remembered the quiet dignity I tried to hold on to when I understood that the life I had trusted was nothing but a net woven to trap me. Now, inside the same life I had almost lost, the memory did not hurt the same way. It rested inside me like a reminder of where I had begun. The coldness of that night did not disappear, but it no longer owned me. I had walked through fear, humiliation, and loss, and yet here I was, breathing steadily in the home they tried to erase from my story. The woman who had sheltered me stood by the doorway, watching me with a softness that carried its own kind of strength. She did not speak. She did not need to. Sometimes presence is louder than language. Her nephew leaned quietly against the wall, giving me space without stepping away. I rose from the floor and opened the window. The breeze carried the distant scent of baking bread from the corner shop. Somewhere a child laughed. A car horn sounded faintly in the distance. Life continued, and I was ready to continue with it. I touched the door frame gently before stepping out. Not a farewell, not a claim, something in between. A promise to myself that I would rebuild from here with the same calm strength that had carried me through the worst. Because dignity is not the absence of struggle. Dignity is the quiet decision to rise without letting bitterness guide the way. Even the softest voice becomes unbreakable when spoken with truth and steadiness. And I would love to know, where are you watching from today? Share your city in the comments. It is special to imagine every place where this message finds a moment of peace. If this moment touched you, there is more waiting for you. When you are ready, click the video on your screen and keep walking with us through these stories of courage and quiet strength.